Welcome to Transform Now, the podcast brought to you by SS&C Blue Prism. Agentic automation isn't just the next step in automation, it's the future of how work gets done. By enabling intelligent, autonomous agents to take action, adapt, and collaborate, organizations are unlocking new levels of productivity, growth, and customer delight. Join us as we explore how agentic automation is reshaping work for the better, for customers, employees, shareholders, and most importantly, you. To stay on top of the hottest topics in the world of agentic automation, subscribe now. Let's get into the show.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Transform Now. I'm your host, Michael Marchuk.
And I am Brad Hairston.
And this is our weekly pulse check of AI and automation news. As we do every week, we have a number of articles. And Brad, are you ready for these articles today?
Michael, I was born ready.
I know you were.
Right in.
So our first one is from CEO World magazine. The article is entitled, "It's 2026. Can your AI spell ROI?" This is a discussion point that we've had a number of times in terms of what companies are experiencing or want to be experiencing as they get into 2026, because they haven't yet experienced this for the most part. And that is the return on this big investment they're making into AI in their organizations. So what did this article kind of go into to kind of lead us to believe that this is the year this is going to change?
Yeah, this is the perfect first article for an episode like this, and it really kind of sets the stakes perfectly. The fact that we've moved from the age of AI experiments to what the author in this article calls the dead reckoning. So certainly an interesting way to put it. We should start this episode off with a bang. So essentially, this piece is drawing a line in the sand and saying that if CEOs can't demonstrate measurable AI ROI by second quarter of this year, that's not too far away, then their boards are going to lose patience. And we've seen this kind of pressure cycle before. In the past, it was mostly around ERP implementations that never seemed to end, and things like that. But this is really kind of raising the stakes and saying, all this talk about AI and all the wonderful benefits, that's great. But firms have been investing, and we know all the big tech companies have been pouring endless amounts of money into infrastructure and chips and data centers and all of that. Now's the time to prove it. So it speaks a little bit about what is an acceptable ROI.
I thought that was interesting.
Threshold,
yeah,
right? Yeah, and it didn't really dive into that too much. It said some are saying 30% makes sense. You spend $1 million, you get an additional 300,000 in cost reduction or revenue enhancement. But then according to others, and they cite IBM as one example, they're saying a 55% ROI is really the goal. And so I'm sure everyone has an opinion on that. I think just some positive benefit is better than none. And certainly, this is from a CEO magazine, so they're trying to drive home the point that CEOs should be on edge about this. The patience is thinning, and they also talk about what is the payoff window for these implementations, and they say the author suggests that a simple implementation, the payoff might be 9 to 18 months. But for something that's much more complex, it could be 18 to 24 months. So that's not going to make boards and others feel better. I think they're looking for some returns this year, and that's really the point of the article. And one other thing, Michael, the author feels like part of the solution to this is that every company should have a chief AI officer. That's a C-level role that is absolutely critical to making sure this happens, because all the other C-level execs have enough on their plate. They all care about AI. They're all trying to rally the troops and do this the right way. But you need someone that is really, really, truly driving the company to rethink the way they're doing everything and to use AI as the key driver to that. And so I don't know how quickly that's happening. I really haven't researched that or done any reading or what have you on it. But I thought it was a interesting point that the author got to at the end, that this is something every company should do. And if they don't, then they're probably going to have a challenge, meeting these goals.
Yeah, I would agree. And I know we've talked with folks that have described this whole concept of getting to ROI as a challenge, because there's going to be a number of times where your organization is trying something new and there's a steep learning curve to it. So all of this time you're putting in, it's like building a factory. Your first car that you build up, rolls off that line, costs $20 billion, right? And if you look at it that way, then there's no ROI. What about we get to the second car? It's still going to cost us $10 billion for that second car. You can't look at it that way. This has to be a long-term viewpoint, that the skills that are being built into the organization to get ready to do this just take some ramp time. And also, not every project is going to be worthwhile doing, but it's certainly worthwhile trying. So spreading out the way that you try this. Yeah.
And according to one survey, half of CEOs believe their job is dependent on getting AI right in 2026. So it's definitely a priority for most CEOs, and the fact that half of them feel like their job is in jeopardy if they don't do it right. I mean, that's another huge point to this, I believe. And the stakes are getting even greater, as we know.
Totally agree with that. So speaking of high stakes, let's get into an article from VentureBeat. OpenAI's acquisition of OpenClaw signals the beginning of the end of the ChatGPT era. Could it be? So, as you know, OpenAI ended up buying OpenClaw. It was a project called ClaudeBot, and there was a lot of issues specifically with that particular implementation, security being one. We talked about this in the past. What is this article talking through, though?
Yeah, so OpenClaw, for those that live under a rock and haven't been paying attention to the news, just to clarify, I mean, it is a rapidly trending open source personal AI assistant that has been created by this guy named Peter Steinberger, and it's designed to run on your own devices, on your Mac, on your Windows device, your Linux device. I mean, it can run on basically anything, and it's a proactive, always on agent. It's only a few weeks old, but it has really gotten a lot of buzz. Users describe it as the same feeling they had when ChatGPT emerged. And, it's as you said, they've become part of OpenAI. It's a little bit more like an acqui-hire because of the stage that OpenClaw's in. But it is significant because OpenClaw was originally built to work on Claude. And by bringing Peter into OpenAI, they didn't just acquire his talent and his ideas. They redirected, all of these token consumption back to their own infrastructure. And so I'm sure Claude was not thrilled by that. And, and in fact, I saw a picture from the other day in another news feed where Sam Altman and Derry, the Anthropic CEO, were standing side by side in some event, and they were all putting their hands up, and those two CEOs were the only ones not holding hands at the top. So that tension is real, and I'm sure every day there's new moves being made that cause both of them to feel even more and more competitive. So OpenClaw is it's an interesting capability. It's a little bit of a defensive move against what Meta did with Manus. We talked about that acquisition a while back. But now OpenAI has brought in OpenClaw. Now OpenAI had their own agents, but they didn't gain the traction that OpenClaw has. And I guess the huge irony here is that many developers or companies that have started playing with OpenClaw and taking a look at it feel like it is it's got some of the missing things you need, like root access and persistent memory, but it's also a bit reckless. It needs some guardrails. It's a little bit like letting this hyperactive agent go in your environment, and no one feels like it's ready for prime time. And the fact that OpenAI is benefiting from their momentum while at the same time having to deal with that and make sure that they build a safer, more enterprise-ready version of it.
Yeah.
It's funny that those two are happening at the same time. But
one thing I found was funny is that the CEO of Langchain, Hairston Chase, the article has a quote from him. It says, "What set OpenClaw apart was its willingness to be unhinged," a term he used affectionately. So yeah. And even then,
unhinged. It doesn't make people feel good,
right?
Anyone who cares about risk and compliance and those things, which is most of big companies.
Yes,
they all do. That's not a term they want to hear.
Not necessarily.
They love hearing about agents that actually work and make employees better and more productive and do all those things, but. They're gonna need to do some fine tuning of OpenClaw before it really takes hold. Most are looking at this as another real world signal that conversational AI and things like that are kind of giving way to the agentic era. This is another example of agents that are becoming prominent within these big, LLM companies who have been paying more attention to infrastructure and things like that. Now they're bringing these newer companies into their franchise and hoping to play offense with that. So it'll be very interesting to see where this goes from here, for sure.
Agreed. So going from OpenAI buying OpenClaw, let's take a look at what banks are doing. So this is an article from CNBC. Digital employees, AI boot camps. America's oldest bank is spending billions on tech. This article is about BNY, and it talks about some of their digital employees that they have built to do work inside their bank. Can you enlighten us about this article?
Yeah, Bank of New York. The oldest bank we have in the U.S., and yet they're leading edge. They're doing some pretty significant things. They have 134 what they call digital employees, essentially agents.
Mm-hmm.
They spent $3.8 billion on technology last year, roughly 19% of their revenue. This is the highest proportion among their peers, and there was an analysis done by Goldman Sachs, which identified BNY as one of the companies that genuinely could see sizable benefits from AI. I mean, that's a pretty good recognition, from Goldman Sachs.
I agree.
So, I mean, they're taking steps that most people are, still think it's a little too far, too fast. They're calling these essentially like employees. They're giving them logins. They're giving them human managers. They're giving them unique roles. They're doing performance evaluations. So this is a big deal. Now their headcount really hasn't dropped that much. It's dropped from 53,000 to like 48,000. So very slight drop off. They are not saying that's due to AI or the presence of these digital employees. They're still putting all the focus on employee productivity, and this is making our employees better. The other thing they've done, which the article talks about, is they've built this proprietary platform called ELIZA, which integrates open source models and commercial models with their own like internal data, and it's secure and compliant. And they've trained their employees on it, which is a great move.
I think that part there is when we can't emphasize enough. I mean, the article brought this up. It said almost all. So how many employees they had? 48,000. Almost all of BNY's workforce has completed a 10-hour training for this ELIZA.
Yeah.
10 hours of training, and that with the idea that this is to help these non-engineers find creative ways to automate parts of their own jobs. So 48,000 times 10, 480,000 work hours that were dedicated to training just inside of BNY on AI. That's a very significant investment that they're making towards their future.
100%. And this is the playbook every enterprise should be employing, right? Because the top-down mandate, deep enablement, and then bottom-up application.
Yep.
Because they say that most of their employees, even the non-engineers, are starting to build their own ELIZA agents.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, kudos to BNY. I think they're setting a great example. They're I think a leader in kind of their usage of AI and how they're really promoting it and using it. And so I understand how Goldman Sachs would look at them and say that, they're likely they're one of the most likely candidates to see some real benefits.
Right.
And the article also talks about Goldman Sachs, ironically, that they also have been developing agents with Anthropic, and they're doing that for some workflows that are traditionally very sensitive and usually not ones that people would put AI into initially, like trade accounting or client onboarding, things like that. So, two banks that are setting good examples, but this one's really all about BNY, and I applaud their efforts.
I do too. It's very, very good direction. So our next article is from Fast Company, and it's entitled "Why Trust is Key with Synthetic Data in the Agentic Era." So we've talked about having good data with AI is one of the key parts of your environment. You having a good model and having good data and have good training. All those things are important, but data, if you have really lousy data, you're going to get really lousy results, even if you have the best model working on it. So this article talks about EY, and I've got some issues with it, but I want to hear your discussion first.
Yeah, I'm anxious to hear your take. I probably some of the same ones I had. I mean, this is written by Joe Deppa. I don't know if that's how you say his name, but Joe Deppa, he's the Global Chief Innovation Officer at EY. And it gets into the infrastructure that most practitioners don't think about, and that's the data layer that actually feeds these agents. And it's one of these pieces where the further you read, the more you realize that agentic AI might be missing, something. And so this author makes the strong case for synthetic data, which is data that's it's fake, it's generated data by AI and it's used to train, to test, to fine tune, to simulate the behavior of agents. And it does all that, without relying on real world data that may be scarce, may be sensitive, or just too expensive to collect. So he makes a really strong case for it and explains why EY themselves are using synthetic data. And his main hypothesis is that agentic systems need way more training data than real world data sets, can provide. And so that's what's ultimately driving the need for synthetic data. He also makes other arguments, like, if AI is trained on biased data or incomplete data, then the outcomes are gonna reflect those flaws. So synthetic data can be one way to fix that. It also overcomes privacy hurdles in some cases, because you're creating fake data that really has no data privacy issues. So, all of those things he uses as arguments. And then probably one of the biggest was just scale, right? Because you need way more data to make sure these systems, these agents are foolproof. And he uses the example of Waymo, where they trained their Waymo self-driving cars on 20 million miles of real world driving experience, but 20 billion miles of simulated driving experience. And Waymo feels like out of that, they're getting a safer machine that will get everyone where they want to go. That's hard to argue with on one end, but I think there are others, not this author clearly, but there are others in the market who feel like synthetic data carries some embedded risk with it. When your agent operates on data that was AI generated to begin with, then you can end up in kind of a feedback loop where the model's blind spots are amplified, right, instead of corrected. And we've talked about, I think, some other articles on this show that have amplified this whole point that you're not just producing the wrong answers by feeding in maybe synthetic data. They also might result in wrong actions because you're dealing with agents, right? And that makes this an even more dangerous environment if you're using AI data to test AI. That whole echo chamber, concept, that's come up many times before. So some would say, I get the point. Synthetic data is going to play a role, but human data really must be the anchor, especially for regulated industries. And probably a lot of regulators and government authorities are not going to allow, testing just done on synthetic data to pass the test. They're going to require quite a bit of human data. I don't know. What did you think, Michael? Was that the issue you had?
So the understanding I understood from his perspective was creating. You mentioned those things, the safety, the scale, whatnot. You also mentioned the whole echo chamber piece. I think in some cases, since synthetic data is a good thing. I'm gonna get to the Waymo thing in a moment. But if we talk about, we need to make sure that our systems are able to leverage like fake patient information. We can create 10 billion names that are all randomized names with randomized ages and randomized back and forth, whatever, to create this test data. To me, that makes sense to validate that the systems are able to sort, classify, characterize, whatever, as they do it. So that I do understand. The challenge I have is when you start, you talk about Waymo, you said 200 million miles of real world, but 20 billion, is it 20 billion of synthetic?
Yeah, 20 billion, yeah.
Ask the people who had apartments that overlooked the Waymo parking lot when they were coming back from the end of their day. They had a bunch of Waymo taxis that would come in and beep their horns all night long at 2 a.m. because that's when they were coming to park, and that was how they were managing that environment based on the simulated that they had gotten from all that data. So did it work? Yeah, I'm sure in some such cases it works fine, but it also identifies there's certainly other aspects that they didn't take into account. Another part of simulated data, which I think is a great positive, but again relates to real world environments, is when you teach, if you call it, teach a humanoid robot to walk or to move. Doing that in a simulated environment where you simulate gravity and allow it to figure things out, figure out how to move its actuators and balance itself inside of that makes perfect sense because there's no risk to any of the hardware or people to do that. And you can do it over and over and over again very rapidly over a long period of time in a safe environment. That makes perfect sense. And in that case there, you've simulated the environment, not necessarily the data, because the data that comes out of it is actually data that you can leverage in real world with these physical robots. So again, simulating things, there is a reason why you'd want to simulate, for sure. Is it the right case all the time? I don't think so. But, we are moving forward with this, and we'll see where it goes. Maybe simulated data will get better in the future, a number of these cases. But I can only imagine getting simulated lung cancer things to screen when, in fact, it was simulated to start with. It may start feedback looping into a point where there's false positives involved in there. So anyway.
This made me think about the Google DeepMind guy that left to form his own company, which I can't remember the name of it, but we talked about it a few weeks ago, and he's aiming to build an AI model that is more based on feedback, more of experiential,
right?
Not based on mounds and mounds of data that is used to train it.
Right.
That seems to be a trend that is kind of building a little bit more momentum. But most of the LLMs are not wired that way. This article definitely drummed that up. But the author does say at the end, transparency is the key. If you're using synthetic data, you got to make sure everyone understands that, and especially regulators, and if you're in a regulated industry. And he mentions how by making it known, there's a better chance that it's going to be an accepted approach. Right. So that was a fair point I think he made toward the end.
Yep. Our last article is from FedScoop. This one is talking a little bit more about how at least the U.S. government is looking to help organizations across the U.S. to do a little bit more training, kind of like BNY was doing. The name of this article is "The House Bill Seeks AI Workforce Tax Credits, Agency-Led Outreach." Basically, they're trying to push through a tax credit to allow for artificial intelligence workforce training to support getting America's workers ready to use AI. Can you tell us a little bit more?
I thought it was an interesting article coming out of Washington. It's interesting because it represents our legislative branch trying to catch up with what companies like BNY are doing. They're already doing it on their own, but trying to help more companies catch up. And so I think it's worth noting. I mean, it's called the AI Workforce Training Act, and it offers a 30% tax credit for AI training, and it's capped at $2,500 per employee. So, it's I think it will be maybe more significant for the smaller companies. That could make a difference. For the big companies like BNY or Goldman Sachs, they're already doing a lot of this, and also this tax credit wouldn't even be a blip on the radar for them.
Right.
But it is interesting. It covers accredited courses. It covers certificate programs, in-house instruction on things like prompt engineering and data literacy and AI ethics. Most significantly, though, Michael, I think, is the fact that this is it's a bipartisan bill that perhaps signals the fact that our government in general, across both sides of the aisle, are starting to feel that anxiety around workforce displacement. And they've done a lot of things around AI. There've been a lot of things passed, but this one seems to be something that's really speaks more to the issue of we know people, jobs are going to be impacted. We know there may be people that lose their job because of AI. This is a way to reskill them and make sure they have a chance of recovering on the other side and getting another job somewhere else. So, I think it's a small news story that didn't have a lot of text to it, but to me, when I read it, it says a lot. It talks about kind of what our government is thinking about, and I think again, introducing legislation to make sure that displaced humans or those that are augmented by AI, have somewhere to go and a way to continue to thrive in their jobs. I think that's a good thing.
Agree. Well, that's all the articles we have for this week's Pulse Check. But as you know, Brad, every week we do another great guest and we publish that online. And they have some other great insights of their own. So make sure you tune into those as well. And until next week, we'll see you then.
Thanks for listening to Transform Now, the podcast from SS&C Blue Prism. You can find all of our episodes on your favorite podcast channel, as well as YouTube. To stay on top of the hottest topics in the world of agentic automation, subscribe now. The future of work is here.